Now, there's one more thing in here, because this command in here applies to all commands to level 0, 1, and 15. We have to make sure that we re-edit that policy elements, that command set. And if we want the user to be able to command sets, which this command set was initially used on the iOS demonstration. If we want the user to be able to say configure terminal and router rep and put network statements and passive interfaces, we also have to allow the user access to the exit command. That was not a requirement on the iOS, because on the iOS the exit command is a level of 0 or 1, and we have not configured privilege level 0 or 1 authorization. Because on the iOS router, on router 2 in here, when you define authorization for commands, you define for which privilege level do you authorize commands. On the ASA, it's a global statement for all commands. So I had to add the exit keyword to this user set, because the user has to be allowed to log in, configure what it has to configure, and also then exit out of the VTI session of the ASA. You have to make sure you put the exit keyword in there as well. So now let's go on router 3, SSH bat to ASH 3, authenticate with the TACACS user to confirm I can only configure router rep on the ASA and not everything. Let's go on router 3, say exit, I'm exiting, and let's now authenticate again with the TACACS user. That was TACACS user, the login password, then enable, CISCO the enabled password. And now if I say conf t, it should work. Authorization failed. Authorization failed because what this means is that probably on the ACS server, if we go to access policy and we go to the authorization rule, on this first rule which is being used by the TACACS user, I have deny all commands. Let's say deselect and select that set of commands for the TACACS user. Let's say OK and OK and save changes. I should be able now to say conf t and router rep and network statements. RIP doesn't have, of course, wildcard mask and passive interface default. But for example, command version should not be allowed. There we go, it is not allowed, as expected. Likewise, interface gig01 should not work, as expected it does, and then say exit. And exit again. So again, this command controls the authentication at the console with the fallback on local. This command controls the authentication at this command controls the authentication at via SSH, TACACS with a fallback on local. This command controls authentication at the console via TACACS with a fallback on local. This one via SDM, likewise TACACS fallback on local. And this command globally controls all commands which a user can type, doesn't matter how it's connected to the ASA. So the last step is going to be likewise to go on the ASA and configure command accounting. Because if we go now on the ACS server and we go to command accounting, monitoring reports, launch monitoring report viewer, and we go to, it was already opened. Let's close it and reopen it just to make sure we don't run into any issues. If we go back to catalog AA protocol and TAGAX accounting, we should not see the commands which were configured on the ASA, only the ones from the iOS. And those are only the commands from the iOS. First of all, because there are very few of them, and second of all, because those commands were counted from router 2. So let's also enable command accounting on the ASA. So we go in the same part, configuration, device management. We go to users AAA, AAA access. We go to the accounting tab now, and we can configure accounting for when users have been using the enable keyword, or we can configure accounting for when users have authenticated via the console or via SSH or via Telnet, or what I'm interested into is configure accounting for commands. And I'm going to go enable that, require command accounting for the ASA, and it's going to be clearly via the TAGAX server, and say apply. And likewise, that's a command. If we say show run AA, which is going to enable command accounting for all commands on the ASA. It doesn't matter how those commands are configured via SSH, Telnet, console, or ASDM. Which means even now, if I'm going to say interface gig 01, this should be accounted for. Exit. Let's confirm. In here, let's say reload for the accounting log on the ACS. And there we go, the username of CISCO, Let me see if I can catch up all the required information. There we go. The username of CISCO, which was connected on ASH3, has typed in the interface gig 01 command and command A accounting whatever. And this command, this DAP XML was actually from the ASDM. I said refresh on the ASDM and has reread the dynamic access policies from Flash. So this was a result of doing refresh on the ASDM. And there we go. So just to make sure everybody properly understood this, let's say refresh again in here. So on the ASA, on the authentication tab, you control authentication per type of connection, ASDM, console, SSH, Telnet. And for all of them, you can configure a remote server with fallback on the local database. Also in the authentication tab, you can configure the enable authentication method, which likewise can use a remote server with a fallback on the local database. And this is what it's ideally recommended to use in order to get privileged level access to the ASA. Ideally, you're going to use this because it allows you to use either the remote server of TAGAX, and if it is not available, you're going to fall back on the local database to still get access to the privileged mode of the ASA to be able to configure it. In the authorization tab, in here, in this part, you enable command authorization, which likewise you can configure the remote server of TAGAX or a fallback on the local database. Ideally, this is what you want to do. And as I stated before, this part, which is the exec authorization, you'd do this instead of doing enable authentication. So you should choose one of the other. Either you allow users to get access to privileged level mode via the enable method, or via the exec authorization method. You click enable, But as I said, the challenge is in here that you can also only do execute authorization either from the remote server of TACACS or from the local database, but there's no fallback in between. And there at the accounting tab, you can configure accounting for when somebody performs the enabled authentication, or when somebody performs the login authentication via console, SSH, or telnet, or command accounting. Okay, if we want to test the local fallback, what we can do is we can go on the ASA. Let's say reload in 5 just in case we lose access to the ASA. Do not save the config. No. Let's say actually write. And let's say reload in 5. Or let's say reload in 10 actually. And now let's break the connection with the TACACS server. Which it means that I'm going to go and shut down the ACA server not to be reachable. I'm going to go on the switch. Should be on switch 1 or on switch, I'm not sure if it's on switch 1 or switch 2. Show run interface FA107. Before we do that, let's disconnect from the clearly from the ASA console, and let's make sure we have a local username in here with a privilege level of 15. Is going to be, let's say, ASA user with a password of ASA user and a privilege level of 15. An enabled password, it is going to be enable pass. Now let's shut down the communication with the ACA server. Before we do that, as I stated, let's say exit from the console. Let's disconnect. Let's shut down the communication with the ACA server. Now if I want to authenticate again at the console, because the TACACS server is not going to be reachable at the console, it should fall back to local access, which means I should be able to get authenticated with the local username of ASA user. So ASA user and ASA user. It's going to first try to go to TACACS. It's going to fail, so it should fall back to local authentication. Because now TACACS server is down. It's gonna give it tried 3 times and then it timed out. So I'm connected as expected. I'm connected to level of 1, which means now I'm gonna say enable to get access to 15, which means I'm gonna fall on the authentication enabled console. I'm gonna try to via the tag is gonna fail, then via the local configuration, which is enable. And you put the user's name, password, ASA user again. There we go. So this means again that if somebody wants enable access, which means privilege mode, then TACACS is not available, fall back to the local database, which means the user's configured password. So, and I got access to level 15 because the user is configured level of 15 in there. There we go. And now, if you say should run include AAA, command authorization is going to be done. TACACS server is going to fail via local. So I should be able to type in all commands, interface gig01 as expected. Okay, now before we move on, just to make sure we don't do any kind of misconfiguration, because I'm going to need the SA further. What I'm going to be doing now is I'm going to remove authorization of commands to be on the safe side, and I want to leave the console to be authenticated via local only. So note this, and put the console via local authentication. Just to make sure I don't get disconnected, let's say reload cancel, and say exit, and ASA user, enable ASA user, and also let's put the enable authentication to be likewise just based on the local database, because now we're done with the ASA configuration. And local. There we go. Okay, let's see if you have any questions in there. A question from Piyush: how we integrate AD in ACS or ICE? So configuration wise, you just go, if we have ACS in there, of course in the GUI is going to be look different on the, it's going to look different on the ICE because the GUI is different. But you go, if I have access to ACS in there, you go to network resources. You're gonna go to users and identity stores. Of course, you go to Active Directory. So it has to be under users and identity stores. You go to Active Directory. Let's wait for the GUI to refresh. Well, of course, I have to first of all unshut the port because AC is no longer reachable. Let's make sure I can ping ACS again. And I can. So let's click again. There we go. You put in there, so you put in here a name which is locally significant. You put in here the domain name, which has to match on the domain name of the forest or of the domain if you join a forest or a subdomain. Then you put in here the credentials of an admin which is allowed to join computers in the AD. Because both ACS and ICE are going to join, are going to be members in the LDAP or AD tree. So in the integration, both ICE and ACS are going to join the LDAP scheme as a computer in there. So you need users, a user right in there which has rights in the AD scheme to join computers to the domain. Now whatever you put in here, those credentials are not going to be stored. So these credentials are going to be used initially to join the domain. Because once the ICE or ACS have joined the domain, then they are in the domain, they are authorized as per domain joining, so those credentials are no longer needed. So it's not unsafe to put in there like a regular admin. That's the first step, and then of course once integration is being done, you go back and forth, and you're going to have other tabs showing up in here in order to read the AD schema, in order to match on users, user attributes or on computer attributes, which those attributes are going to be used in your authorization policies. The same configuration is being done on both ICE and ACS, is just in different places. And what you have to understand, what you have to make sure is that when you do the integration between ICE, ACS, and AD, ICE and ACS have to be NTP synchronized with the AD. They have to be within 3 minutes maximum one to another, otherwise integration is not going to work. So Piyush, I hope I answered the question in there. Now Matthew states, what is the difference between those two enables on ASDM you just configured, please? So Matthew, I hope I clarified that out with the previous example, because I'm not sure about which those two enables you speak on ASDM. because you have only one kind of enable, which is, oh, I think you meant about this enable. Okay. So again, the enabled keyword, if it's under the authentication tab, it means authentication enable. The enabled keyword, if it's under authorization tab, it means that you just enable authorization for commands on the ASA. Or here you enable exec authorization. So those enabled keywords have nothing to do with the enable method in there, right? Likewise, in the accounting part, you have a lot of enables in there just to enable accounting for what exactly? Another question from Matthew. So when you log on, you have privilege level 15. Then when you have privilege level 15.2 on ASA, I mean, when you SSH, you was at privilege level 15, then you had to also enable privilege level 15. Okay, let me reiterate what happens in here. And let me go on the CLI part, because we saw that initially, but let me reconfirm that with you from the CLI part. So the question from Matthew was, the problem with the authentication authorization and the privilege level being assigned, which, to clear up the confusion, is very simple. So on the ASA, you have two ways to get level to privilege level mode, to level 15. And let's suppose you're gonna get authenticated via SSH to keep things simple. So you configure authentication as in here via the attacker server, and then fall back on local. And then once with this configuration in here, let's put in Notepad option those two options: text edit, new document. Let's put that command in there. So if you configure this and this, so with this configuration, it means that the first line in here, so with this configuration, it means that once you get authenticated via SSH, either via the TACAC server, or so either via the TACAC server via the local database, it doesn't matter how you get authenticated. With this configuration in place, with those two commands in there, it means that once you get authenticated via the TACAC server via local, doesn't matter what's configured on the ASA server, privilege level assignment, or doesn't matter what is the privilege level configured locally to the user. So with that configuration in there, with those two commands in here, it means that you always, when you log in, you always get access to user mode. So with this configuration, when you log in, doesn't matter who authenticates you, doesn't matter how the local database is configured, or how the ACS is configured, the TACAC server. When you log in, you get a level of 1 assigned. To get a level of 15, you gotta say enable to get a level of 15 access. And now to get a level of 15 access, it means that if you perform that enable authentication via the TACAC server has to be configured with that maximum allowed privilege. Or if the ACS server is down and you fall back on the local part for enable password authentication, it means the username in the local database has to be configured with level of 15. So this configuration option in here, you can never ever get direct access to level of 15, whatever you do. Now the second option would be to not use the enable part, but to use AAA authorization exec. Now, if you use this configuration, it means that if when you log in, if you authenticate via the TACAC server, if the TACAC server is configured to get you direct to level 15, it is going to work because this the exec authorization method is configured, which this means that get the previous level from the TACAC server. But the problem with this configuration, which is in general you're not going to see it implemented, is that because if the TACAC server fails, then you can never ever get access to privilege mode. Because this command states in here, exec authorization is being done via the authentication server. And there is no option to fall back on the local database. As you can see on this command, you can either put in here that the exec authorization is being performed either via local, and that's it, or via the authentication server. There is no fallback being configured. So this configuration is going to give you direct level 15 access without having to go to the enable process. But the problem is that if the TACAC server fails, you cannot get access to level 15 on the device. So that is the problem. That's why it's in general not used. So Matthew, I hope I cleared the confusion now. Now, Piyush says our ACS server is down and we forgot local username and password. Then how we can get access of iOS and ASA? Password recovery mechanism on iOS and ASA. Correct. That's the only way to do it. So if the TACAC server is down and you have fallback on the local database and you don't know the usernames and passwords on the local database, then password recovery is your only option. But of course, that can be let's say that can be disabled, that capability. So if password recovery feature is still enabled, you're going to be able to go to the password recovery process. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Okay. Now, the last steps which we forgot to do in here, just to end up with this, with the ASA part, is that verification-wise, I'm not sure if we've done this. You verify the TACAC server with show AA server, and verify AA list with show running config AAA. And you can also test authentication against the AA server using pretty much a very similar command as on the iOS part. It's going to be not test AA group, but test AA server, because the group is defined via an AA server configuration. So like for example now, if we go on the ASA, and if we say show AAA server, then it's going to show you server group of local, which is predefined of course, and then server group of TACAC server, the name, the protocol used for that group, servers in that group, if the server is active or not, and pretty much that's it. Show run AA is going to show you the AA configuration, and test AA server authentication. And what is the server group name? You can have multiple of them configured. This one, username CISCO, password CISCO. IP address of the server, you have to put the IP address of the server even though you have configured, you have set test AA server, because in that group you can have multiple servers. So you gotta tell the ASA, okay, which server from that group of servers do you want me to send you to authentication request against? 172.16.1.100. And of course, it was successful as expected.